movie. I kind of want to just watch the rest of it, but that's okay. Awesome. I love this scene so much where Indiana Jones is faced with this impossible task. He's faced with 3 impossible tasks in that whole section. But right there, he has to take this leap of faith. Even though he can see absolutely nothing except a plummet to who knows where. To his death, basically. Will he take the step anyways? That is the question. Even though he has no idea what the outcome is he going to take the step? What kind of crazy, insane risk is that, right? Is my earring hitting this? I can hear it clicking. Well, I'm going to go with one earring. Cool. There we go. We'll just take the other one off. Might as well. Be sure to keep this in the sermon cast. Just kidding. So, it's this crazy, insane risk. He's hoping that everything will turn out okay, but he doesn't know if it will. He just has to take this leap of faith. And that is what we are going to talk about today. Risk. And more specifically, the risk that is involved in following Christ. And in following the things that He has for us. In following the huge and incredible plans that He has laid out for us. So much of what I'm going to be talking about today kind of goes along with what Pastor Dave's sermon was a couple weeks ago. I think that the sermon was called, "What Will You Do With Your Religion?" or something to that effect. Will you actually live it out? Or will you just sit in your knowledge? So, it's almost kind of like what we learned from the great motivator of our day that Luke was so gracious to show us so well. But Shia LaBeouf said it so well when he said, "Just do it." Miles says it pretty well too. So does Owen. They're so cute. So most of us probably live our lives relatively free of risk, right? And I don't necessarily think that that is a bad thing. There are many things that we should not take a risk on, I don't think. Most of us are probably not going to be stepping out onto a ledge like our friend Indiana did, where he can't see the bridge. Most of us are not really going to be living our lives like that. Most of us are probably wearing our seatbelt in the car, hopefully, so that we can reduce the risk of fatality in a car accident, just saying. And we are hopefully also following traffic laws to reduce that kind of risk. Most of us, if we have any investments, we don't have it all piled into one stock, because as we saw last week, the stock market plummeted, so you would have lost all your money. So most of us are probably not living these crazy, insane risks every single day, but that's okay for a lot of things. I've always been one who really likes rules. I like to follow rules. I know not everybody is like that, but I really like to know what the rules are and what my parameters are. Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to know what I was allowed to do and what I wasn't allowed to do so that I wouldn't get in trouble and I could do everything just right. Sometimes I would get in trouble, but it was mostly because I was like guilty by association. I would be the little kid in the corner like, "Hey, we're not supposed to do that, we're not supposed to do that." And then an adult would walk in and then we would all get in trouble and I'd be like, "I wasn't even doing anything." But I hated that. I don't know if you guys remember those days, but that's what would happen. I was never the one. I remember when we would go, my friends and I, we would hike up to Seven Falls all the time. But I never wanted to risk jumping off those crazy cliffs that you can jump off to, which is like the reason that you should hike up to Seven Falls. But I would just like sit in the first one, because there's 7 of them. But I would just sit in the first one and be like, "Cool, this is great." Well, all of my friends would go up there and do all these fun things, and I didn't want to take the risk. One of my first jobs was being a lifeguard, which is pretty much telling people to follow all the rules. And saving people if you have to, but I never had to. So pretty much all I did was just tell people how to follow the rules. So this means, since I like to follow rules, it usually means that I do not like to take risks. Because I don't always like to break that mold. I want to fit into the mold or make the mold look really nice and pretty, if that makes any sense. I like to have it all figured out before I do anything. I'm not usually going to step out unless I know that I kind of have it all under control. I have the situation under control. It might seem like sometimes I'm a risk taker, like maybe even coming up here and speaking with you guys or in front of you guys, but I know that I can do this and it can fit into my little box of things that I know I can do, so it's okay. And so it doesn't feel like that much of a risk to me. When I was in Master's Commission, which if you don't know, that is a ministry school that I was a part of for 4 years. I was a student for 2 years and then I was on staff for 2 years. And I started to look around me at some of the other leaders that were just like the rock stars of the group, that were just like killing it, everything they did, everyone was like, yeah, cool. And I started to notice some similarities between them. And normally they were the ones that were not afraid to take risks, and they were not afraid to fail. Sometimes it might even seem like they were reckless, because it was like, normally I would be the one off to the side again, like, hey, but that wasn't really what we were supposed to do, like we should probably change it to be like this, like they told us. And this other person, all the other people that were like this, were like, yeah, well, let me just go, yeah. And I was like, but let's bring it back, come on. But the thing is, they were not afraid to fail. And if they did fail, they would just jump right back up and keep running. But I wasn't like that. And so yes, I did become a leader and I was on staff and I had some of the most unbelievable opportunities and experiences of my entire life. And I learned so much and I grew so much, but I always knew that there was something that I wasn't getting. There was a missing element to my experience. Something that I was missing out on, but I just kind of always thought, but that's just not my personality. I'm just not a risk taker, and so it's okay. It doesn't really matter. It's just not my personality. But how often did the Lord want me to take a leap and to take a risk and to step out onto that bridge when I couldn't see anything, like Indiana, and I didn't, because it wasn't in my personality. Now, that's not to say, okay, the Lord has created us with our own unique and individual personalities. I am not downplaying that. Almost every single sermon that I have ever preached here, I probably mentioned this, how the Lord has created each and every one of us to be unique, and He has created your personality to be your personality. I'm not trying to say, change your personality. That's not it at all. However, that doesn't mean that He doesn't still want us to step out and to take risks and to be bold, whether it's in our personality or not. In the last sermon that I did, which was actually in June, I think that might have been the longest period of time that I hadn't spoken here. It's so weird. It's almost like there's a lot going on here at CCA or something. I don't know. But this is almost, I was thinking about it, and it's almost like the continuation of that. So it's almost like the sequel to that sermon, which is usually not as good. The sequels are normally not as good, so hopefully that's not the case today. Hopefully it'll be like a Toy Story 2 type of thing, which is, I really liked Toy Story 2. I hope everybody else did. And some of this was actually partly from a conversation that I had with Kiefer, but he's not here. I was going to do a little shout out to him, but yeah, we'll just pretend that he's there. And I shouted out to him. He's here in spirit. He felt it. But one thing that I mentioned in that last sermon was how sometimes the Lord is leading you down a path, and sometimes He only gives you the very next step. And He doesn't always give you, most of the time actually, He doesn't give you all the steps to get to the dream or the promise that He has for you. A lot of the time He's only going to give you the one right in front of you. And then you can't see the next one until you've taken that first one. So you have to have the trust in the Lord. You have to have that faith so that you will take those little steps that He wants you to take. But as I was thinking about that again, what if the scenario was a little bit different and you could see the end result? Because a lot of the time you can't even see the end result. You can only see the step in front of you. But what if you can see the end result, but you can't even see this step? All you can see is that. Are you still going to step? Are you still going to take that step that the Lord is asking you to take, whether you can see it or not? Because sometimes He didn't ask us to see the step. He just asked us to step and to go in a certain direction, even when we don't know where our foot will land, which is why we can take such inspiration from Indiana Jones. He took that step, he took that leap of faith, and he couldn't see it at all. To the best of his knowledge, he was going to plummet to the ground, but he took that leap of faith. So the question is, will we take that risk of stepping out when it might seem like we're just going to plummet? We can look at Scripture and we can see risk taker after risk taker filling the pages of Scripture. One of my favorites is Moses, who time and time again, he risked everything to speak with Pharaoh to let his people go. Every single time he went back into the Pharaoh's presence, he was at risk. We can look at David, who took risks constantly, most notably this little story of David and Goliath, where he, you might not have heard it before, but he killed a giant when he was a boy. He was like 15 when he did that. That was a risk. That was a crazy risk. Even going and speaking with the king to see if he would be allowed to do it, all of it was a crazy, insane risk. And he took risks all the time. Another risk taker was Esther, when she went before the king to save her people. The king could have easily taken her out instantly without even speaking a word, and she would have been done. But she risked everything to go and speak with him. But the guy that I want to focus on today is Peter. He's one of my favorites. I love that guy. He gives me hope that the Lord really can use anybody because one thing that I love about him is his boldness. He wasn't afraid to fail. He wasn't afraid to ask Jesus any silly question or to do anything silly. It was almost like he was the one. Sometimes I feel like the disciples were always like, I don't want to ask him. You ask him. No, get Peter to do it. He'll do anything. Because he did. He was always the one asking the crazy, silly questions. But thank goodness he asked them, because then now we don't have to ask them. Peter already did it for us. So thanks, Peter. We love you, man. But then what happened? He didn't just stay silly little Peter. He went on to be one of the greatest proclaimers of the gospel the world has ever known. He led the early church into great revival, and he was one of the most influential people in all of Scripture. But what we're going to look at today is in Matthew 14. So you can turn there or open it up in your app, because that's what I'm doing. So Matthew 14, starting in verse 22. So this is right after the feeding of the 5,000. And it says, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he sent the crowds away. After he had sent the crowds away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind stopped, and those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "You are certainly God's Son." First of all, I love that it says, so after the feeding of the 5,000, it says he immediately told them to get in the boat and go. Jesus, in his infinite knowledge, knew that a storm was coming. he knew that this was an incredible moment that he was about to have with his disciples. And with the rest of us, a few thousand years later. So he knowingly sent them into a storm to teach them something. That'll preach, and there's a whole other sermon that could go along with that. But that is so incredible to me. He knowingly sent them into this storm because he knew that there was something really big that he needed to show them and that he needed to teach them. Okay, so this crazy storm has rolled in, and these guys are out in the middle of this large body of water, and they just see this person strolling along. I mean, can you even imagine that? I think it's kind of easy to look at all the disciples and be like, come on guys, didn't you recognize him? He's Jesus, you walk with him every day, wasn't it obvious? But seriously, that's not even in your realm of possibility to be out on this body of water in the middle of a storm and see a random dude start strolling along. You can't even fathom that. So of course they're thinking anything could be happening. So of course they're like, yeah, it's a ghost, because what in the world is going on? That's insane. They're freaking out. So what's the first thing that Jesus says to them? In verse 27, he says, take courage. And that's the first thing that I want to tell you, is take courage. If you're scared about the risk that you know the Lord is trying to ask you to do, that you know the Lord is prompting you to do, take courage. Take courage, for he is with you. Yes, he sent them into that storm, but he came and rescued them. Take courage. You are never alone. In verse 28, Peter says, Lord, if it is you, command me to come onto the water. And he said, come. And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. I know that most of us have heard this story a lot of times. But Peter walked on water with Jesus. What? That's crazy. Peter went against everything that his logic and his reasoning has ever told him. All the previous knowledge tells him that you sink in water. You don't have to be taught that. You just know you sink in water. But Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. Just like Pastor Dave talked about a couple weeks ago, we have to get out and we have to do it. We can't stand here any longer and profess to have faith and trust in God when we only step out if everything looks and feels okay. It didn't look and feel okay when Peter got out of that boat, did it? Jesus only stopped the wind after they got back into the boat. So that means that the waves were still chopping and the wind was still howling, and yet he got out. If we wait for the so-called perfect circumstances, we are going to be waiting for a long time. Right now, based on everything that's going on around here and based on the sermons that Pastor Dave has been preaching, I really believe that the Lord is not asking us to wait any longer. Even though there is a time and a place for waiting on the Lord, I absolutely believe that. But right now, he is calling us to action. And he is calling us to step out. He's calling us to risk it all when he says, come. Now, a few things might happen to you if you start taking some of these risks that the Lord is asking you to take. And some of them might not be all that fun. You might look a little crazy. Those around you might start asking you a couple of questions. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because we should surround ourselves with people that will ask us the hard questions when we're making big decisions. But imagine all of Peter's friends when they're sitting in the boat. Imagine all the disciples. As Peter starts to step out in the middle of a storm, he is about to step out onto this crazy choppy water. They were probably like, hey, hold on, Peter. What are you doing, man? Like, you know that things sink in water, right? You remember that? What are you doing? This is crazy. It's really late. You should probably just get some sleep. You're probably a little delirious. Like, just go take a nap, Peter. We'll take it from here. So you might look a little crazy, but that's okay, because Peter walked on water, didn't he? That's right. Another thing that might happen is you might fail. And I know that's not what you want to hear. It's not what I want to hear. I don't like failing. I was just telling you how I like to do things when I know that I can succeed at them. But even Peter failed. He started to sink. He got distracted and started to sink. And it can happen to anybody. If it happened to Peter, it can happen to anybody. You also might start to doubt. That's basically why Peter started sinking in the first place. He began to doubt. He started looking around at his circumstances and what was going on around him instead of looking at Christ, and he started to sink. It even says in verse 31, after Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him, he said, "You have little faith, why do you doubt?" But, you want to know some other things that might happen if you start to take these God-led risks? You might succeed. You might win. God just might show up in the middle of your storm and change everything. He's pretty good at doing that. He kind of has a reputation for coming in and changing everything. The greater the risk, the greater the potential loss, but also the greater the potential gains. Most financial planners will probably tell you that for long-term investing, you have to take some risks. You have to. You should also invest in some things that have a good rate of return, absolutely. But you also have to put your money into some things that are very risky. And you might lose sometimes, absolutely, you might lose sometimes, but you also might win. And when you win, you win. You win big. Same goes for us. I'm not saying that now we need to live every single area of our lives with crazy elements of risk in them. I already talked about that at the beginning. There are some things that you should not be risky in. I am not telling you to go out and bungee jump without a cord, okay? So don't tell anybody that Pastor Kristen told you to do that. But what I'm saying is that we need to step up the level of risk in our lives when it comes to where God is leading us. And we need to step up our faith and our trust in our Lord. Whether we see all the steps that we're supposed to take or not, will we still risk it? In fact, it's more of a risk when you can't see the steps. It's not really risky if you know exactly where the steps are. That's not a risk. So most of you know this. We announced it last week. But if you weren't here, here is the next announcement of it. This summer, I will be moving to Nashville, Tennessee, which I'm excited about. It's going to be crazy. So I think that most everybody here knows that I am very passionate about personal finances and helping people win with money. I just talked about money. I just had a point about money. I especially love the whole Dave Ramsey system. That's why I've done a couple of Financial Peace University classes. But Dave Ramsey's headquarters, his offices are in Nashville, Tennessee, so my hope is to go out and try and work for him. Woohoo! Yeah! There's the announcement. So, this is a huge risk for me, okay? Let me give you a couple details. I do not have a job lined up yet. I haven't even applied yet. Probably going to this next week, but I haven't yet. I don't know where I'm going to live. So kind of two really big factors, I have no idea what's going to happen. However, I believe so strongly that this is the path that I'm supposed to take, and the Lord has confirmed it time and time again through so many different avenues that I feel totally at peace about the decision. Even though there are still so many unknowns, not just with going, but with even here, I wonder who's going to take over for what I'm doing here, who's going to do the bookkeeping, who's going to do the finances here, who will be the new assistant manager at the Sage. What if I apply and I don't get hired at the Dave Ramsey office? Then what do I do? Then how will I support myself? Where am I going to live? There are 1,000 unknowns, but Guess what? God did not ask me to answer all those questions. He asked me to follow him, and he will answer the questions. He asked me to step. He asked me to apply. He asked me to move. He didn't say, and then I'm going to unleash all of these other things. He said, apply, and he said, move. That's it. So the question is, am I going to do that? Am I going to take those steps? When I can see that over there, I can see that end result, but I can't really see this. Am I still going to take that step? Are you still going to take that step? If you can see this end result, but you can't see this step, will you still take that step? As I was praying about this sermon this week, I felt like there were many people in here that it's almost like you were holding this dream and this passion inside of you, kind of like this, and not really letting it out, not like maybe it wasn't good enough, or maybe you don't think that it was from God. Well, I'm going to tell you that it is from God. And if he put a passion inside of you, then it is from him. And if he wants you to do something, then do it. Now is the time. The time for waiting is over. Now is the time to step out and to take those risks. And the question is, are you going to? He has the answers. You are not supposed to figure out the answers, which is hard for people who like to plan, but you are not supposed to figure out the answers. He figures out the answers. You just do what he's telling you to do, whether you see where your foot's going to land or not. That's all you are required to do. The rest is his job. And he's good at his job, let me tell you. So I'm going to ask Kai and or Annette to play. And so what I want us to do today, this might be a little bit of a different response time, because I am not going to just ask you to come up and like a normal altar call or anything. What I really want you to do is to take action. I want you to do something with this dream, this passion that the Lord is giving you. So what I want you to do is, as Kai is playing, I'm going to pray, and then what I want you to do is, if you feel led, come up and write your dream and your passion down, because I don't know about you, but when I write it down, it makes it real. It makes it something that I can't just take back. Maybe you can throw the paper away, but you know that it was there. So I want you to come up. I want you to take that risk of others seeing you and seeing that you have a passion and seeing that you have a dream. I want you to take that risk, come forward, write it down, and then you can go and do whatever you want. You can pray, you can go back to your seat, you can kneel, I'll pray for you, whatever it is that you need. But that's how I feel like this response time needs to go, is you need to make it real. You need to take a risk right now. That doesn't mean that you are going to go out and achieve that goal and achieve that dream right now. That means that you're going to step out right now and start taking that action. That's what today is about, is that first step of action. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you so much for today. Thank you for how awesome you are, God. Lord, it can be so crazy and so scary to take these risks, but Lord, today we are saying that we believe in you and we trust in you, and we believe that you have our best interests at heart. We say that all the time, but God, we are saying it again. You have our best interests at heart. You are not going to ask us to take a step without having the landing for us. God, I thank you so much. Lord, speak to people right now. Speak to people. Speak to those dreams that maybe they've put aside. Bring them back to their mind. Bring them back to their memory. Maybe it's something that you haven't thought of in years. The Lord is bringing it back to your memory right now. Know that it is from him. Father, you are so awesome. Give us the courage. Help us to take courage to take these risks. Because really with you, it's not a risk. It only feels like a risk to us, but it's not a risk. Because you are there to